I'm Gus Luxton. I work for Teleport. I am a specialist solutions engineer, a recent title change, but essentially my job is to talk to people about how they use Teleport and on a kind of figure out the ways that we can help them solve problems and interesting ways that they can do things with Teleport. I live in Nova Scotia. I am somewhere up a long way away from here. It was a very long flight yesterday. It's actually about the same temperature there as it is here at the moment, so that's something. I never thought I'd honestly come to San Francisco and be colder than I am at home, but that's something. You might know me as Web Victim. I'm going to move this a little bit, there we go. You might know me as Web Victim on GitHub. I post a lot on there. I answer a lot of discussion questions. And I'm that annoying purple space invader who never lets anybody else answer questions on the community Slack. People have said this before, like, oh, hey, it's like whenever I post anything, that guy with the purple space invader avatar just answers all my questions. So that's me. Hey, if you haven't seen me before. So what can I teach you? Well, maybe something, maybe nothing at all. Like, again, what's interesting to one person is totally banal and boring to another person. But I love answering questions, as you probably guessed. Ask them at any time, like shout out, do whatever, or we can save them for the end. I really don't mind, but this is meant to be interactive. Like, I want people to kind of get something out of this. A lot of the talks that you've seen so far have been kind of talking about procedural stuff and lots of stuff to do with that. This is going to be more of a kind of developer experience sort of thing. Like, what can you, as a person who uses Teleport, how can you make your own day-to-day experience with it better? So you may know what I'm going to talk about. You may have some of the context of that, but if you don't, I really hope you learn something. So I'm going to start with a little bit of terminology, just because it's important to kind of discuss what I mean when I say given things, and that will become sort of relevant later on, like when I talk about proxies and things to do with that. So what is a Teleport cluster? Some people, again, may know this, but it's what you actually need set up in order to make using Teleport possible in the first place. So essentially, it's like the minimum viable product of Teleport. It consists of an auth server and a proxy server, and I'm going to explain what both of those things are in a minute. But when I say Teleport cluster, that's what I mean, at least one auth server and one proxy server. If you use Teleport Cloud, we run this for you, so you don't have to think about it. But in your own setup, you're probably running them yourself. You can just deploy them all on one machine, and everything works that way. Pretty cool. What is an auth service? An auth service is the stateful part of Teleport. So it's the part that stores the users, the roles, the auth connectors, certificate authorities, and so forth. And it keeps all of those in its backend. It can be backed by SQLite by default, or DynamoDB, Firestore, etcd, that kind of thing as well. So that's the part where the kind of brain of Teleport is where everything lives. What's a proxy service? A proxy service is the user-facing part. So if you're a user and you want to connect to your resources behind Teleport, you connect to the proxy service, and then that hands you off to the other things. It hosts listeners for incoming connections and allows people to once they've got a certificate from Teleport, they can present it and access resources behind it. It's largely stateless. I say largely. You'll need a token if you kill one and you want to restart it again, but definitely you don't have to think about it as much as you do with an auth server. What's the difference between a user and a login? And again, I'm going to talk about some of this stuff during my talk, but a Teleport user is the way that Teleport itself refers to you as an individual. So it might be an email address, it could be your GitHub username if you're using GitHub for single sign-on, or it could just be a handle, a username that you set up for yourself and you add. It gets tied to everything you do inside the cluster, so in the audit log, in the session recordings, everything that happens is all tied to your Teleport user. Whereas a login is something that Teleport allows you to use to access resources. So, things like EC2 user, Ubuntu, root, SSH usernames, that kind of thing, or database usernames, or other usernames of other forms. So there's a distinction between the two. So I'm going to talk a little bit about environment variables. Again, this may not be relevant, but some people might find this interesting. So you can, normally you would run tsh login -- proxy teleport.example.com, but you don't have to do that. You can actually export an environment variable and then just run tsh login yourself. The reason I'm going to go through some of these things is because personally, I'm a bit of a sort of command line junkie. I focus a lot on user experience and the way that I want to use. Like, I have aliases for a lot of things. I run a lot of commands very often. I want them to be as simple as possible, and I don't want to have big wordy commands that I have to type all the time. I want to make things as simple as possible. So I would like you to be able to do the same thing. If you're anything like me, you enjoy having like an optimized experience, so I would like for people to be able to do the same thing. So you can set your teleport proxy in an environment variable and then just run TSH login. You can do this for a bunch of other stuff too. Like, so I mentioned the concept of a teleport user. You can set your teleport user as an environment variable as well, and then you don't have to specify that on the command line. Sometimes you have to do this, sometimes you don't. You can set a teleport cluster. So confusingly, even though I said what a teleport cluster is, we have the concept of trusted clusters as well. And a trusted cluster is where you can link another cluster in a kind of relationship to another. So you can have a teleport cluster, and then you can have leaves that come off it. And the leaves, you can log into them via the root. So you can do that kind of thing. But if you don't want to put that in your commands, you can specify that via environment variable too. So if you combine all of these things together, then you get to a stage where you effectively can just run TSH login without any parameters at all. And the reason why this is valid, or the reason why this is useful, is because if you have multiple clusters or multiple different servers that you want to log into, multiple different teleport installations, it can be frustrating to switch between the contexts of those all the time. So you can make this simpler. If you run TSH login and you set these environment variables, you can then optimize this process for yourself. You can also do this for things like teleport auth. So if you want to use a different connector, if you have single sign-on configured, you can run those things as well. And pass yourself through. So if you have your default configured as GitHub auth, you can pass local auth using this variable instead. So again, for multiple clusters, can be a useful way to do it. You could also override the teleport login. So normally when you run TSH SSH, it has these bits set with it. You can, you have Unix user at hostname, or you pass it to -L. You can set this as well. So defaults to the same as your system username. So if you're logging into different systems, you can set this to save yourself some time. Again, I promise I'm getting somewhere with this. Why would I do this? Why on earth? The reason is because if you run eval tshenv, it makes your terminal sticky. And the point is that you can log into a cluster and then make a terminal sticky. So if you have 4 different terminals, you can log each of them into a different teleport cluster, make it sticky, and then have 4 different terminals, all of which runs operations in a different cluster. Pretty useful in terms of being able to run multiple commands at once, being able to have a different way to approach these things if you want to do it. What tshrenv actually does when you run it is essentially just outputs the environment variables for the session that you're currently logged into. So that's one way of doing this if you want to. You can use kubeconfig as well. So this is not strictly a teleport thing. There are pretty much any Kubernetes-related tooling supports kubeconfig. So you can export you can set your kubeconfig environment variable to point to a different file, and you can log in, and then you can keep all of your kubeconfigs separate if you want to do that. kubectl supports it, Helm supports it. You can also provide these on the command line as well, but it helps you keep your context separate. So if you're on a machine where you don't have your traditional tooling installed, you can run these things as well if you would like to. Expanding on this a little bit further, you can also have built-in command aliases with teleport itself. So if you don't want to do all of this via the shell, you can actually define your own aliases for TSH, which it will use. So you can put these in a system-wide config file and then say, when I run TSH local, what I actually want to run is this entire string here. This is useful if you want to set up everyone's environment to work in the same way, because you can have a kind of centrally documented set of processes where run this command to log into this cluster and do these operations. You can have all of this deployed and pushed out from a central config management situation where everyone's laptop works the same way. Everyone has the same aliases. Everyone has the same setup as everybody else. And that can make things simpler in terms of deployment, if that's something you are curious about doing. You can take this one step further. So you can reference the aliases in ZSHRC or other shell startup scripts, make your whole terminal experience more enjoyable. So if you want to log into your local cluster and make the terminal sticky, you can have an alias for that. Commit those to your doc files, other repositories, similar things to that, and all your other machines will work the same way. So that can be useful too. Let's talk about targeting nodes by labels. So one of the things Teleport lets you do, of course, is you can set nodes, you can set labels on nodes. So you can use those in your RBAC primitives to say anyone who is in the developer group should be able to log into this node which has the developer label set on it. But you can also do things from the command line with this as well. So you can say, show me all of the nodes in my cluster which have a given tag set on them, and Teleport TSH will pass all of those through. You can do this via the web UI too, but again, if you can do all this via the command line, it becomes more useful in terms of being able to kind of filter and process the data and run things in your own local environment. You can run commands as well. So if you want to run a command on every server that has the env AWS label set on it, you can do that, and Teleport will pick them up, and it will run them all for you. The output is not the tidiest or the nicest, but you will get the output of every command. So if you want to run something on all of those machines at once, that's pretty handy. How about if you want JSON output? You can format JSON and pass it through a whole load of different things. If you want to be able to do that, you can do this too. So you can say, I want JSON output of all of these nodes, and then you can pick out the host name of that. Teleport pretty much every command in Teleport, tcuttle commands, TSH commands, they all support the format parameter. Usually it's either text or JSON. And JSON will give you a whole string of output which you can pass through JQ or anything else you want to do as well. So if you want to build like turbocharged kind of processes for running lots of things from the command line, filtering servers, doing that kind of thing, TSH can definitely make that easier when you use JSON output. The other thing I want to talk about here is kind of the concept. Teleport as a whole, we don't talk about Teleport being a password broker. Teleport is identity native access management where you don't need secrets, you don't need stored passwords. But there are times when that can actually be useful. So I'm going to show you something where one way in which you can kind of use Teleport to broker passwords. And the product marketing team is going to hate me for this because obviously this isn't what we do, but I'm going to put some caveats at the end which will hopefully explain everything, and then hopefully I won't get chased off the stage with a barrage of people after me. So if you still have applications out there which use basic HTTP authentication. Where I mean basic HTTP authentication, I mean when this box pops up in your browser and asks you for a username and password. There aren't many things that still work this way. I mean, there are like legacy services, but if you have them and you want to connect to them, obviously, doing this in the current method would mean that you need a username and password from some kind of centralized vault or some storage like that. Teleport might actually be able to help you here. So Teleport can send arbitrary headers to applications. So basic authentication is essentially adding a header to your request saying you encode it in a base64, you put the username and the password next to each other, you base64 encode it, and you send it to the application. So that's what the string looks like. Teleport can actually inject arbitrary headers into its requests. So why not let your Teleport app service do this for you if you want? So you can have a legacy web app which still uses basic authentication. You can add in a header which will send a predefined username and password string, and then Teleport can handle your authentication in front of that rather than the application itself. So you're kind of trading off. You're buying Teleport authentication because it's going to handle all of the login for you, but you don't have to have a centralized, you don't have to let anyone know the password for your application anymore. You also get the audit logging, as Hunter mentioned previously. You get audit logging, you get the ability to see everything that you can do there. So this could be useful. There are caveats. This isn't secure in any way, shape, or form. Like, do not do this. This is a really, really, really terrible idea. However, it is cool from a technical perspective, and that's why I'm talking about it. So anyone can find out your app's username and password if they read the config and just base64 decode it. But if you trust a user, like for a home lab situation, I'm strictly talking about, I do this in my home lab because it's useful, because it's something that saves me a lot of time, and then I don't have to remember passwords for things. If you trust your users, it can save you an awful lot of time. And of course, good operational hygiene, all of these things, you should always be locking down permissions on the Teleport config file on any server where it's running anyway. So pretty much a kind of acceptable trade-off in certain situations. There's a lot of nuance to it. This does, in some ways, turn Teleport into a password broker. It's really not what we do. I'm really, really sorry. But it's useful, and it's something that you can do if you really want to in certain situations. Thank you very much.
Are you open for Q&A, Gus?
Huh?
Open for questions?
Yeah, absolutely, of course.
Okay, any questions for Gus?
Of course.
All right.
So with command aliases, are you able to overload existing functions like login?
With the what, sorry?
So with TSH command aliases,
Yeah.
can you override login?
Yes, you absolutely can do that. Yeah, so you can, if you want to extend login to always add a given parameter or do something differently, yeah, you can absolutely do that. The teleport documentation page on this is actually really good. Like we have expanded out. You can also reference the current TSH executable with an additional variable. So if you have multiple versions of TSH, it will pick the current one that you're using. You can also shell out to Bash and other things like that as well if you want to. So you can run additional commands inside. You can make TSH run a whole string of things if you want to as well. So I wrote about this purely because I didn't know until relatively recently that you could do this, and I was like, whoa, that's really cool. So I'm gonna, that's why I ended up adding this to the thing. But yeah, the sky's the limit with these things. Like this is one of the things I kind of, I really enjoy seeing the different ways that people have modified teleport and they've changed it to make it do the things they want, because I might have some small amount of context on what you can do, but the second that other people get hold of it and start experimenting with it and playing with it and doing things like that, you get a real great knowledge base from the community of all of these things. So I'm really excited to see what people can do with this, and that's the whole reason for this talk in general. Was I didn't know teleport could do that, and that's kind of where we ended up going. So thanks for the question.
So I realize teleport is not a password broker. I got that.
Thank you for clarifying.
But hypothetically speaking, if let's say I had a legacy application that I had to maintain for insert reason X here, right? Because the sky is
We've
blue.
all been there.
Because the sky is blue. So does teleport support a way to look up a password instead of putting it in the config YAML? Could you put a placeholder that teleport would be like, oh, that's a placeholder. I'm going to go look that up in Vault or AWS SSM or something else.
So today, no. At least not as part of the stock functionality. It makes me wonder whether you could do something. No, because even with a dynamic label, if you could run a command to pull, no, because it would expose it. I would honestly love for us to do that, because I think application access is one of those things where we're kind of halfway there. We've started it, and I would really like to see us expand that out into something that could do exactly what you said. Again, we don't want to store the passwords, but I understand that legacy applications are a thing. They're going to be a thing for any amount of time going forwards. And I would really like for us to be able to do that. I'm trying to think about a way that you could, even if you were to template the config file in some way, you could run it to make it pull that out. What could you do as a kind of janky back-end workaround that would enable that to happen? I suppose you could, if you use dynamic applications, you could no, because then again, you can't pass the, if you had dynamic applications that had rotating basic authentication, you could theoretically inject those Vault short-lived passwords, whatever, into the config file and re-register the application every time it changed, but that would be,
put that on a cron job and let it go, right?
Yeah. I love things like that. Again, it's all these people are saying, no, cattle, not pets. I'm like, I'm with you there. But this janky way of doing things is kind of cool too. If it works for you, I'm up for that. So yeah, I wish we could get there. I hope we can. That would be super cool.
Instead of using basic access, we did something like a JWT or something that expires, like an OIDC machine token or something along those lines. And then using Hunter's example, we could get, we would have to reload the app, like you said, but that would require. Sorry, I'm on a tangent now.
No, I'm with you. I get what you're saying for sure, and I think, I would love to see I would love to make it easier. JWT is really cool. So the fact that you can just pass JWT from teleport to some other application and let it handle things like Grafana, this works really well. Things like Elasticsearch, where they all have support for JWT, it works great. I would love to see an easier way to wrap. So for context, I run a whole bunch of stuff in my home lab, which is all, web interfaces for services. None of them support JWT. They're all written in C#. I didn't write them. They're just open source projects that I'm running, but none of them support JWT authentication. I don't know enough C# to be able to kind of go and modify them to support JWT, but I would love some way that I could kind of wrap all of that around and do that. I can't think of a way to do it, but if there was an easy way to plug JWT auth into more applications, I think teleport would be super valuable in those situations. So Yeah.
Well, and the other way around too. So if you have existing tools that don't support authentication, and you can
Yeah.
put the proxy up unauthenticated with the header injected with that expiring token, but yeah, you'd have to reload it with another.
Yeah.
I forgot what the question was. We started solutioning. And
You
now I
can
forgot the
send
question.
JWT as a header with Teleport as well. So you can inject a header with the JWT, but then the application kind of has to understand it. And I wish. Again, I suppose some discussion posts coming up or something. I'm sure we can figure some way out to do that.
Any other questions?
So could we do the same thing as JWT, but with maybe mutual TLS for the identity instead with Teleport?
Could you repeat the part of the question?
Sure. So like we mentioned about JWT, like injecting with a header and so on.
Yeah.
Do you have support for mutual TLS for pulling the identity off of from the X509 certificates themselves, the same way that you see with like service meshes in Kubernetes?
So you mean that effectively Teleport would present the certificate to the application for authentication, and then you present a certificate to Teleport separately to do the authentication that way?
Yeah, you can like terminate it at that point. So instead of like having to manage like a JWT
Yeah.
and getting something submitted, just the fact that you have an X509 certificate of a specific way, you can lift that identity straight from the TLS transport and then pass in whatever information you have from the identity there.
Yeah, again, we don't do kind of mutual TLS authentication to applications at the moment. Like everything, so Teleport's transport itself all wraps all of that, and you can, you kind of get the tunnel. I, again, would love to see us do that. I don't think there's a way to manage it at the moment. I'm trying to think whether Machine ID, so Machine ID is the service that lets you run a bot that kind of gets a short-lived, constantly refreshing token from something. I wonder whether we could. I don't think that though, because the mutual TLS part of that is when you log in from the command, you log in from the user side, not when you pass to the application. But that would be, again, like you say, that's the way Istio and other kind of services handle it. That would be something, that would be a cool extension for us to do. But I don't think application access hasn't kind of been built out as much as other services at the moment. So you can probably do this with Kubernetes, but doing it with application access at the moment is still somewhat tricky.
So you have some great examples there of exporting environment variables. I've got some employees who will need to be using this who don't use their command lines as often as I'd like to. Is there any idea of putting some of those into a config file that could be read from so that I could just push that to their systems and not have to even have them worry about it? Yeah,
absolutely. So I mean, certainly on the slide here, like the two files, you've got the system-wide config file, which gets read. So if you have like some kind of chef management or something that manages people's laptops, and you mean deploy it onto kind of the client machine so they don't have to do it all the setup themselves. You can just give them a pre-canned list of everything.
Well, like we have alternate authentication process, and typing that thing is a pain in the butt. And the second I tell a dev to do that, they'll stop using it. So, and I'm not going to have them type export every single time they do it. So,
of course. Yep. No, it makes good sense.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, Teleport Connect, as Jay points out, Teleport Connect is also a kind of good way to do this. Teleport Connect is our web application which lets you log into a Teleport cluster. It's kind of an embedded Electron browser that lets you log in and run commands that way. That, from a user experience perspective, that can be a cool way to get kind of people who don't necessarily enjoy using TSH, like obviously that's not me, but people who aren't into that, like Teleport Connect can be a great way to kind of bridge that gap and kind of ease the early adoption of that thing. There's new features being added all the time, and absolutely, like I think people can get good value out of that. So thanks for the question.
Okay, great. I think that's probably it. 7 minutes early for lunch.
All right.
Probably appreciate it. Thanks everyone. Thanks guys.
Thank you.